My name is David Oliver Kling, and I will be taking you on a journey of introducing you to paganism. This is only an introduction, and therefore not an exhaustive look at the very diverse religious and spiritual path of paganism. So keep in mind that this is only an introduction, and I will only be skimming the surface. A quote by Christine Hoff Kramer. For pagans, however, practice is at the center of their religious lives. Shared practice, not shared belief, is what ties groups together. Pagans often actively resist defining pagan or paganism. Most pagans were raised as Christians or Jews, although this is changing as pagan parents raise their children as pagans. Many left the religions of their birth due to theological and ethical disagreements, or in some cases, traumatic experiences. As a result, pagans can be suspicious of organized religion and of anything that smacks of dogma or a prescribed doctrine. Standardized definitions of paganism strike some pagans as a threat to the authenticity and spontaneity of their religious practice. Paganism is a general term for many different traditions. So this image illustrates that some forms of paganism practice polytheism, some goddess worship, some earth-centered spirituality, and some combinations of all three of these things. The image illustrates three basic orientations of many pagan traditions. This image is not exhaustive of every orientation that you will find within paganism, but gives you a general idea. Some traditions focus on goddess worship, some are polytheists with many gods and goddesses, and some focus on nature or earth-based spirituality. Some have aspects of all three while emphasizing one, while others might have an emphasis on one with the other aspects being optional. Wicca. Wicca typically falls in the earth-based and goddess worship, and frequently within polytheism. Druidry. Druidry typically falls in the earth-based, but not always within polytheism or goddess worship. Reconstructionism, within a Celtic, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and many others, typically falls in the polytheism category, but not always in the earth-based or goddess worship. There are some traits that most pagans hold in common, and this is a list that is promoted by Christine Hoff Kramer. Most pagans hold in common pantheism, panentheism, or animism, polytheism, hard or soft polytheism, reverence toward nature and the body, reference to pre-Christian myths and traditions and or indigenous traditions, ritual practice, trust in personal experience as a source of divine knowledge, acknowledgement of the principle of magic, virtue ethics, and pluralism. So what is pantheism? Pantheism is the belief that reality is identical with divinity, that God is indwelling in nature and the world and is ever present. God is all. What is panentheism? Panentheism is the belief that part of divinity is indwelling in nature and reality, while a part of God is transcendent or outside of space and time. What is animism? Animism is the belief that all things, including trees and stones, possess a soul or spirit. What is hard polytheism? Hard polytheism is the belief that there are multiple gods and goddesses that are distinct from each other with distinct characteristics. What is soft polytheism? Soft polytheism is the belief that all gods are aspects of a single god or goddess, or that all gods are aspects of one god and all goddesses are aspects of one goddess. Earth-centered pagans and goddess-based traditions usually reverence nature, and Reconstructionist traditions are often nature positive. Most forms of paganism are body-affirming and accepting of LGBTQ persons, as well as alternative relationship choices such as polyamory. Polyamory is the idea of multiple partners in a loving, committed relationship. Most pagans follow pre-Christian myths and traditions. Examples of different pantheons and mythologies are Greek, Sumerian, Celtic, Norse, Egyptian, and others. The different expressions of paganism worship divinity in different ways, and most value ritual practice as an important aspect of their tradition. For example, Wiccans cast circles. They work ritually from a sacred perimeter and work inwards towards a center. Once a circle is cast, it is appropriate to remain in the circle until the circle is opened and the ritual is over. Rituals are often private affairs and often not open to the public. Druids usually work from a sacred center and work outward. In Druid rituals, it is more acceptable to come and go, and the rituals are often public in that it is more acceptable to come and go within a Druid ritual as opposed to a Wiccan circle. Reconstructionists usually make offerings, often to a fire in honor of their gods. Their rituals have more in common with Druidry than with Wicca. Many Reconstructionists, like Roman Reconstructionists, prefer to use the ancestral language such as Latin or Greek for Greek or Hellenic Reconstructionists. Unverified personal gnosis is an experience with divinity that brings new insights but is isolated to an individual. It's when a person has a religious experience and that experience informs their faith. Shared personal gnosis is like unverified personal gnosis, but it is shared by others. So it is a religious experience that is shared by more than one person. Verified personal gnosis is like unverified personal gnosis or shared personal gnosis, but is supported by historical sources. Unverified personal gnosis, shared personal gnosis, and verified personal gnosis are popular concepts with Reconstructionists. A popular definition of magic is the science and art of causing change in conformity with will. In this definition, the practice of magic is the attempt to cause something to happen because you want it to happen, and several forms of paganism practice magic. The practice of magic is important to many forms of Wicca and is sometimes practiced within Druidry, and while not uncommon among Reconstructionists, it tends to be less common. Magical practice is often done during ritual and worship and is like petitionary prayer within other religious traditions. Petitionary prayer is when a person praying is asking for something. Example, in Christianity, the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread." Virtue ethics is the normative ethical theory that is based on Aristotle, an ancient philosopher. Within virtue ethics, there is the mean between two extremes. For example, brave is the mean between the two extremes of cowardly and foolhardy. Many pagan traditions, especially various Reconstructionist traditions, value virtue ethics by valuing specific virtues such as hospitality, honor, piety, courage, and many others. Pluralism is the acceptance of multiple truths simultaneously. It is not uncommon for pagans to subscribe to more than one form of paganism. For example, identifying as a Druid and a Wiccan. It is also common for pagans to syncretize their beliefs by combining aspects of one pagan tradition with another. There are also pagans who identify as Christians, and they are often known as Christo-pagans. An example of a Christian and Druid is Bishop Alistair Bate, presiding bishop of the Holy Celtic Church International, and a Druid within the order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. Christine Hoff Kramer speaks of religious experience when she writes, "The starting place for any individual pagan's theology is the personal spiritual experience. As pagans, we ask ourselves, what makes me feel uplifted, connected, deeply compassionate, or ecstatically joyful? What makes me cope with the anxieties or pressures of everyday life and present my best self to the world?" Many pagans practice divination. What is divination? Well, it comes from the Latin word divinare, which means to foresee, to foretell, to predict, to prophecy. It is related to divinus or divine. Divination is not fortune-telling, but it looks at potential possibilities and questions by asking the divine or God or the gods for insight to a question or to a query. Divination is used to get insight on whether an action is auspicious or pleasing to the gods or to God. Tarot is a collection of 78 cards and is a form of divination called cartomancy, which is divination using cards. Tarot decks are organized into major arcana, which include such cards as the Fool, the Empress, the Lovers, the Chariot, and others. The other set of cards is called the minor arcana and are suits based on elemental imagery that includes swords, wands, cups, and pentacles. Each suit has a page, a knight, king, and a queen card. Tarot has been around since the 1700s. Runes have been used as a form of divination since the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. Their origin is in the Northern European pre-Christian religious expressions of the Scandinavian peoples. Runes are Old Norse letters, often inscribed on rocks or pieces of wood that are cast, and then the symbolic meaning of the letters are interpreted. Each rune has a specific meaning that the rune reader interprets. Ogham is like runes, except that they come from Ireland and Celtic peoples and use an Old Irish script and probably predates the 5th century of the Common Era. Ogham is practiced in a similar manner as runes and are read and interpreted. Augury is divination by using the flight of birds, and augury was popular in ancient Rome. A famous example of augury relates to the founding of Rome. The mythical brothers Romulus and Remus arrived at the Palatine Hill and argued over who would found a city. Romulus wanted to found the city on the Palatine Hill, and Remus on the Aventine Hill. The brothers decided to settle their argument using augury to determine which was the most auspicious choice. Remus saw 6 vultures, and Romulus saw 12. The city that was founded on the Palatine Hill was named after Romulus, the city of Rome. In Roman culture, magistrates were inaugurated by the Collegium Augurum, and the augur priests would determine if the gods favored the magistrate. Once the magistrate had the favor of the gods, he was permitted to hold office. Inaugurations are still held today, which is a carryover from ancient times. I'll be looking at 3 different pagan origin myths: the myth of matriarchal prehistory, the myth of the burning times, and the myth of paganism as a root religion. The myth of matriarchal prehistory is the notion that at some point in the history of the world, during a time before much of our recorded history, society was matriarchal, which is society governed by women, instead of patriarchal, which is society governed by men. This romantic ideal pointed to a time that was ideally much different from our current society, and that paganism was just a hearkening back to this matriarchal pseudo-utopia with an emphasis on goddess instead of God. Scholar Cynthia Eller writes, quote, "As we enter a new century, matriarchal myth no longer enjoys the high status within the feminist movement that it once held, nor is it as central to feminist spirituality. This seems to be due not to any disproof of the theory of matriarchal prehistory, but more to a greater confidence on the part of feminists that their cause is just and their success possible, and on the part of spiritual feminists that their religion is authentic, whatever its genealogy." Ironically, matriarchal myth, no doubt, played a role in increasing feminists' confidence in themselves, though it is this same confidence that has made matriarchal myth a less pivotal force in feminist lives and thinking. End quote. The myth of the burning times, popularized mainly amongst Wiccans, is the idea that in the Middle Ages and during the early foundation of the United States, there were massive persecutions and inquisitions against witches that resulted in millions of witches, mostly women, being put to death and or tortured, often by being burnt alive. While persecutions did occur, for example, the Inquisition and the Salem witch trials, the numbers associated are very inflated, and this period of persecution was not as the myth suggests. A quote by scholar David Waldron, quote, "The central feature of the mythology of the burning times is that it is a contemporary expression of the Romanticist episteme in Western culture, finding authenticity in its ideological opposition to Enlightenment modernism, Christianity, and patriarchy. Ultimately, this is manifested through the construction of a witch/pagan heritage and history through appropriation of symbols deemed inimical to Enlightenment modernism and symbolically representing the struggles of contemporary Western women via a Holocaust mythology of the witch trials. The consequence of this is ultimately the belief that the past needs to be constructed in a particular format because that map applies to the present and, more importantly, is based in the underlying belief that all history is constructed according to this paradigm. In other words, history is the product of contemporary politics, symbolism, and aesthetics are opposed to being purely and empirically verifiable study of an actual past." End quote. There is the myth of paganism as a root religion. I have 2 quotes, both by scholars who are practicing pagans. The first one comes from Michael York, which states, quote, "I contend that paganism represents what I term root religion, and that historically all other religions are offshoots and or counter-developments of the root religion." End quote. The second comes from Christine Hoff Kramer, and she counters this thought with, quote, "A third myth of pagan origins is one that is particularly dear to my heart, and yet it is equally questionable as a literal historical tale, the myth of paganism as a root religion," end quote. So not all pagan scholars accept paganism as a root religion. Here is a quote by Manon Hedenborg White from his essay Contemporary Paganism. And he writes, quote, "Paganism also owes much to the Western esoteric tradition, which can be traced back to Hellenistic Egypt. After the 17th century and onward, esoteric traditions became increasingly associated with initiatory orders such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and the Ordo Templi Orientis," end quote. So what is Freemasonry? Freemasonry is a fraternal order that is heavily focused on symbolism and mythology surrounding the building of King Solomon's temple mentioned in the Bible. The first Grand Lodge was established in 1717 in England. There are several Grand Lodges around the world. While most are men only, there is a branch of Freemasonry known as Continental Freemasonry that allows women. Freemasonry has initiations celebrating the old medieval stonemason guilds consisting of entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason, along with other initiations that have been added over time. There is a link between Freemasonry and modern-day Wicca, likely through the founders of early Wicca. Such links are the use of the phrase, "so mote it be," instead of "amen," the use of the term "the craft" to refer to both Freemasonry and to Wicca, the use of the term Cowan to describe an eavesdropper or someone trying to witness secrets either perpetuated by Freemasonry or within a Wiccan circle. These are likely not coincidences, but the result of the early founders of Wicca in the 1940s, such as Gerald Gardner, also being members of a Masonic lodge. Rosicrucianism, or Rose Cross, is a spiritual and cultural phenomenon that today has many varieties. Rosicrucianism is said to have originated in the early 17th century. Some branches are offshoots of and connected to Freemasonry, while others are completely separate from Masonry. Rosicrucianism claims to have secret knowledge passed down through the ages. I'd like to share a poem by Henry Adamson called The Muses' Threnody, dated 1638. And here goes. "For what we do presage is not in gross, for we are brethren of the rosy cross. We have the mason mark and second sight, things for to come we can foretell aright." End quote. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was founded in 1887 by three Freemasons, William Robert Woodman, William Wynne Westcott, and Samuel Liddell Mathers. The Golden Dawn is an initiatory system like Freemasonry that allowed women from its inception and taught Hermetic Kabbalah, with Kabbalah having its origin in Jewish mysticism, astrology, philosophy, tarot, and so much more. Several famous people were members of the Golden Dawn, including famous occultist Aleister Crowley, author of Dracula Bram Stoker, Sherlock Holmes author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Irish poet W.B. Yeats. The Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, was founded between 1895 and 1906 by German Freemason Karl Kellner. Aleister Crowley would later become the head of the organization on or about 1911, and he greatly restructured the OTO. The OTO uses an initiatory system similar to the Golden Dawn, and Crowley incorporated several new elements into the order, including the philosophy of thelema, which can be summarized in 3 thelemic statements. And those statements being, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," and "Love is the law, love under will," and finally, "Every man and every woman is a star." The OTO is like the Golden Dawn in that they practice philosophy, tarot, and other esoteric arts. There are local branches of the OTO all over the world, including Ohio and the United States. Now let's take a look at some pagan symbols. The number of symbols associated with paganism is constantly growing as a tradition or expression of paganism adopts a symbol as their own, and it is added to the collective of symbols associated with paganism. Let's look at a few common symbols in use amongst pagans today. The 4 that I selected are just a sampling. There are so many more in use today. The pentacle is a 5-pointed star, and one interpretation of the pentacle is that the points of the pentacle symbolize the 5 elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit, or quintessence. It is a symbol of wholeness and completion. The triple goddess symbol displays 3 phases of the moon, which symbolize the 3 phases of the goddess as maiden, mother, and crone. Awen is a symbol within Druidry that means different things to different forms of Druidry. However, Awen is typically understood as the spirit of inspiration that flows through creation, inspiring the greatness within humanity. The Thor's hammer symbol is popular among Northern European forms of paganism, such as heathenry. The symbol represents Mjolnir, or the hammer used by the Norse god Thor, the god associated with thunder, lightning, sacred groves and trees, strength, and the protection of humanity. It is not uncommon for individual pagans to practice their spirituality alone and without the dimensions of communal experience, group ritual, and affiliation. So the question remains, solitary or group? It is not uncommon for people who have embraced various forms of paganism to have come from other religious and spiritual traditions that they felt were spiritually abusive and are therefore reluctant to join groups and prefer to be solitary. The late Wiccan author Scott Cunningham wrote books on Wicca for the solitary practitioner in the 1980s when Wicca and paganism started to gain popularity. However, many people felt they had to keep their religious beliefs secret, and the idea of solitary practitioners became fairly common. In this presentation, I focus on Wicca, Druidry, and Reconstructionism. However, there are those who choose to identify simply as pagan without a Wiccan or Druid label. They would likely still follow the traits common to most pagans, but choose to only identify as pagan, and this is not uncommon. Let's look at some Wiccan organizations. The groups are but a glimpse of what is out there, and I chose to focus on public organizations focusing on Wicca instead of specific traditional Wiccan traditions, such as Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Georgian, or the Minoan traditions of Wicca, which are less public than the traditions listed herein. The Aquarian Tabernacle Church of Wicca, or ATC, was founded in 1979 by the late Pete Davis, also known as Pete Pathfinder. It is one of the oldest Wiccan organizations to be recognized as a 501c3 by the U.S. government and has over 29 affiliated congregations in North America. The ATC founded Spiral Scouts, a pagan alternative to Boy and Girl Scouts, and Wolstenstein Theological Seminary, a Washington state-based theological school. The current leader of the ATC is Archpriestess, the Reverend Lady Belladonna Laveau. Circle Sanctuary was founded in 1974 by Selena Fox. Circle is a nonprofit corporation recognized as a neo-pagan church based in Wisconsin and encourages community celebration, spiritual healing, research, networking, and education. Circle sponsors a pagan festival known as Pagan Spirit Gathering during the summer solstice that has been running since 1980, where hundreds and often over 1,000 pagans have gathered to celebrate the longest day of the year. The festival is filled with workshops, rituals, and music. Covenant of the Goddess, or COG, is a cross-traditional Wiccan organization of groups and solitary Wiccan practitioners with over 100 affiliated covens or congregations. It was founded in 1975 in order to increase cooperation among witches and Wiccans to help secure legal protection enjoyed by other religions. COG member congregations typically worship the goddess and the old gods, or just the goddess alone, which is common among Wiccans. Sacred Well Congregation. From their website, quote, "The Sacred Well Congregation International is a universalist, independent, non-evangelical Wiccan church. We are organized for the purpose of conducting and promoting religious worship on alternative spiritual paths. Our church provides open, public venues for the practice of the old religions. We promote community benevolence efforts, spiritual counseling, and religious educational programs, and provide extensive spiritual and administrative support to service members, their families, and military communities." End quote. Now let's take a look at some Druid organizations. Some people who identify as Druids choose to join one of the many organizations available. Most offer a form of spirituality that is between the Wiccan style of paganism and Reconstructionists. However, some Druids consider themselves close to Reconstructionist practice, especially those who follow a Celtic or Irish path of paganism. ADF, or Ariach Fain, a Druid fellowship, was publicly formed in 1984 by Isaac Bonowitz at Burr Oak State Park in Gloucester, Ohio. While having a Gaelic name, ADF promotes Indo-European neo-paganism. There are members of ADF who worship in a Celtic, Greek, Roman, Norse, Slavic, and other forms of Indo-European styles of paganism. ADF congregations are known as groves and are scattered all over the United States. As of 2017, there were 70 groves in the United States. The Ancient Order of Druids in America. From the AODA website, the AODA was founded in 1912 as the American branch of the Ancient and Archaeological Order of Druids. AODA is a traditional Druid order rooted in the Druid revival of the 18th and 19th centuries, offering an opportunity for modern people to experience the teachings and practices of Druidry in today's world. AODA offers an initial ceremony of reception into the order, followed by 3 degrees of initiation: apprentice, companion, and adept, which are conferred upon completion of a graded study program. The focus of AODA is on the spiritual development of the individual, not on group work, and most of our members are solitary. Qualified members may request charters to form home circles, study groups, and groves, which exist to further the work of the order. The Henge of Keltria was founded in 1988 by former ADF members who wanted to focus exclusively on Irish Celtic spirituality. While the organization made a firm contribution to modern paganism, the organization dissolved on October 31st, 2017. There are still people using the Henge of Keltria style of Druidry, just not under a formal umbrella. The Reformed Druids of North America, or RDNA, was formed in 1963 at Carleton College, Northfield, Minnesota. The RDNA's formation was started as a protest of the college's requirement of students to attend a religious service of their choice. Several students got together and started Carleton Grove, also known as the Mother Grove, to fulfill the school's requirement. What started out as a humorous protest now has over 40 groves or local congregations throughout the United States. The Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, or OBOD, is based in England. It was originally founded in 1964 by Ross Nichols and then reformed in 1988 by Philip Cargam. The emphasis of OBOD is on earth or nature spirituality, with some members being pagans and some identifying as Christian. Most of their members, however, identify as some form of pagan. Reconstructionists are pagans who work to reconstruct ancient pagan religions in a modern context as accurately as possible within our modern world. There are strict Reconstructionists who rarely associate with those outside of their expression of paganism, and then there are Reconstructionists who readily associate with the rest of the pagan community. Some forms of Druidry operate in an area that comes very close to Reconstructionism, and some within Druidry have migrated over to Celtic or Irish Reconstructionism. However, paganism is often very fluid, and people will move around or express themselves within several different expressions of paganism. Reconstructionism, by the way, is becoming popular in Europe as European peoples are rediscovering their ancestral expressions of religion. Nova Roma is an international Roman revivalist and Reconstructionist organization created in 1998 by Joseph Bloch and William Bradford, also known as Marcus Cassius Julianus and Flavius Vettius Germanicus, and was later incorporated in Maine as a nonprofit organization with an educational and religious mission. Nova Roma endeavors to promote the restoration of classical Roman religion, culture, and virtues, and shared Roman beliefs, such as Romanitas, the special dignity that comes from being Roman. The Troth is an international heathen or Northern European form of paganism. It is an organization that is inclusionary as opposed to folkish or exclusive to Germanic peoples. The Troth has striven to be inclusive and to distance itself from racist forms of heathenry. Pictured are board members renewing their oaths of office. The reed or board members take an oath that includes the clause, "With the Troth I stand against any use of Germanic religion and culture to advance causes of racism, sexism, homophobia, white supremacy, ableism, or any other form of prejudice." The Supreme Council of Ethnic Hellenes is a nonprofit Hellenic organization established in Greece in 1997. Its primary goal is the protection and restoration of the Hellenic ethnic religion in contemporary Greek society. There are some 2,000 Greeks who practice Hellenic ethnic religion and over 100,000 who have an interest in it. The council works to protect the rights of Greeks to worship the old gods in Greece, which is a majority of Greek Orthodox Christians, and the Orthodox Church tries to suppress the worship of the old gods within Greece. Hellenion was founded in the United States in 2001 and identifies its practices as Hellenic Pagan Reconstructionism. The organization has local congregations known singularly as demos and plural as demoi. They have a clergy training program and a basic adult education program. As times change, so does the expression of paganism among those who practice it. Paganism is evolving. For example, classical Wicca, that is 1950s or so era Wicca, was very polar in that it focused on male-female polar energies. With modern gender fluidity and non-binary thinking, it has caused a change in how some pagans practice Wicca and has created conflicts between traditionalists and younger pagans. The creation of sacred space is important within paganism. Special places within nature as well as home shrines and altars. What follows are images of various forms of space, including altars made sacred by pagans for their use as ritual space, ancestor altars, and shrines to show honor and reverence to the old gods. Wiccans and Druids tend to both use a similar wheel of the year that honors the winter and summer solstices and the spring and fall equinoxes, along with festivals that honor various harvest times. These feast days are called Yule, Imbolc, Ostara, Beltane, Litha or Midsummer, Lughnasadh, Mabon, and Samhain. Reconstructionists will have specific festivals that are different from that honored by most Wiccans and Druids, such as the Roman Saturnalia in December or the heathen Yggdrasil Day in April celebrating the World Tree. What follows are images of pagans in ritual and ceremony. It is common for religions of any kind to celebrate specific times as rites of passage. Paganism is no different. Pagans congregate to celebrate weddings, funerals, the blessing of babies, for ordinations and initiations into the mysteries. What follows are images of various pagan rites of passage. Pagans have long struggled for equality. From ABC's Good Morning America, dated June 24, 1999, quote, "Pagans and Wiccans have struggled with being persecuted for their beliefs. Getting the pentacle as a recognized symbol on veterans' headstones is one such example. Representative Bob Barr led a campaign to make being Wiccan illegal within the military. Although when he became a libertarian candidate for president in 2008, he changed his view. And back in 1999, Texas Governor George Bush said the military should rethink their position. That's not a religion," end quote. Pagans are often treated with discrimination, accused of devil worship and nefarious intentions. Pagans strive to be accepted and their religious freedom respected and honored. Organizations such as Lady Liberty League, founded by Circle Sanctuary's Selena Fox, are just one of many organizations working to promote religious freedom. Pagans have had to work hard to get the Veterans Administration to honor pagan symbols on veteran gravestones. Here are a few images.